Hey guys, Matthew here, and welcome to my 3.15 League Starter build guide. So there's a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it. So what I decided to actually play for 3.15 League Start is going to be a Fireball Miner. That being said, one thing you'll see that's vastly different here is that we are not using TREMOR, unlike my League Starter for last league. And the main reason for that is because TREMOR is just not bugged, but it just doesn't seem to be working the way that it was working prior to 3.14. I don't know what happened, but in my practice for 3.14 is working extremely well, and then when 3.14 came around the corner, all of a sudden TREMOR just stopped working, really. So I decided that I was going to go with wands instead. This allows us for a lot cheaper price, actually, because TREMOR tends to be really expensive in a League Start scenario, but also this allows us not to need fusings because we are going to be using a tabula. I'll talk about that, all about that when we get to the build guide. I think the first thing to do is to actually showcase the build for both its bossing capabilities, which is what it's made for, and mapping capabilities, because a lot of people have been, telling me that when it comes to this build, it's like, isn't the clear like really bad? Like, I played Fireball and the clear was awful. Like, the clear is awful. I get that all the time, and I don't really know where it stems from, because I think the clear is actually quite good. So let's go start off with a T16 Burrow Chambers whatever map here, 100% quantity. Why not? Now, of course, this is not a map that you would run in the upcoming league because of the nerf to Warding Flask, so this temporal chains would be annoying. So let's just go ahead and re-roll that. Here, how about this? 85% quantity. It's got some avoid elements, some extra cold, some AoE. Why not? Player dodge is unlucky. That's actually kind of annoying for my build, but let's go ahead and run with that. Just to showcase the clear real quick, and then of course I've got some clips for you guys when it comes to the actual bossing potential. So here we go with the actual clear. Now, I don't know who started this idea that this build has really bad clear speed, but I for one think that the clear is actually quite good. Now, of course, it's not similar to anything close to, like, for example, like a cast on crits, I don't know, like a cast on crit headhunter build or something crazy, but I mean, it clears the entire screen in just a few clicks. You could easily put detonate on the left click, which would be even easier. I personally like having steel skin on left click for the extra defense. Now, of course, I am simulating the 3.15 changes, so I'm not using an adrenaline flash, for example, right? This is why it might seem slow, but get used to it. This is going to be the speed of mapping for the upcoming leagues with the massive nerf to Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline. I'm also not like using my flask too much for damage either. Of course, trying to simulate the 3.15 nerf to flash charges and damage. But as you can see, like, the build doesn't really struggle, both either in terms of defense or in terms of damage. I'll showcase here. Now, this is definitely something that's a little bit harder. Let me shut this guy up real quick. Shut up. This is definitely something that's a little bit harder for this build. I'll just go ahead and try to clear this Legion here. Now, of course, this is not a build that is made for this, so I don't intend it. I don't think it's going to be, anything great for Legion clearing. It's not a build that's made for that. But, it can still do it okay. Of course, again, it's not what it's made for, right? This is a bossing build. That's what it's always been. That's what it's made for. But I think that in terms of progressing the Atlas, in terms of getting rid of the Conquerors, in terms of Cyrus, doing Cyrus early game on extremely budget gear, this build is going to absolutely excel at that. Just to showcase the single target real quick, why not? Let's get ourselves to the boss. Now, of course, normally I would gem swap for my single target here, but on such things like normal T16 bosses, you don't even need to gem swap. You're going to absolutely annihilate these bosses, as you can see. So yeah, again, is it the fastest clear speed ever? No. Is it very, very, consistent and pretty good? I would say yes. All right, now let's talk about the actual bossing potential. This is where this build really shines, and then we're going to get into the actual build guide. Okay, so what you have here is a 3-link Uber Elder. I did this on stream yesterday. As you can see, there's only 2 links here. Not only is there that, right, I'm only using a 3-link. I'm actually not using any defensive or offensive flasks. I'm only using a life flask for survivability, and of course a mana flask, which is mandatory. And this is Uber Elder. So just to showcase a little bit of what this build can do. Now, I'm not gonna like watch the entirety of the thing, but let's just see the damage once this one of the phase ends. Okay, here we go. So let's go ahead and debuff this boss here. Boom, boom. And you can see that you can literally visibly see the HP going down on these bosses, despite the fact that I'm on a 3-link. So yes, you could say, oh, it's getting nerfed, it's getting nerfed. Sure, every build is getting nerfed. Literally every single build is getting nerfed. But you can still visibly see on a 3-link the sort of damage that this build is able to dish out without any flasks. So even if this build loses, 30-40% of its damage, which is about what it's going to be losing, it is still going to be able to absolutely shred through bosses like a butter on absolutely incredibly cheap budgets. One of the, in my opinion, probably one of the only builds that is going to be able to really do it. Now, of course, traps is going to be another really good option if you're somebody who likes a trap playstyle. I personally don't. I much rather play something like a miner. Now, the biggest issue with lack of damage is actually mana cost. You run out of Flask very, very quickly if you do not have enough mana. Now, we do have a few advantages of playing a build like this. I'll talk about those when we get to the actual build guides. When it comes to mana sustain, it's not that bad. Even with the upcoming nerfs, I think it's going to be okay. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and showcase the end of this fight. I believe I died 3 times, but what do you expect? It's on a 3-link and it has literally no flasks. You don't expect to be able to do a gazillion damage, but this build somehow is able to pull through every single time, which is absolutely crazy. All right, now that I've showcased a 3-link Uber Elder, let's have a look at another clip, another boss, and this is going to be the Feared. This time around, however, I'm using a 5-link with no damaging flask and no defensive flasks. One thing that I do take advantage of here, though, is the low life toggle, a mechanic that I'll talk about a little bit later on in the guide. So, of course, it's not a super juiced up Feared or anything like that, only 23% quality, it's magic, but it's on a 5-link and it's got no flask. And check out this damage right here. A bada boom, a bada bam, absolutely annihilated. Here, I made a mistake. Instead of going for a Zeri, which I should have, I went for the Cortex guy, and that caused a couple unnecessary deaths. I should have went for Uber Zeri as soon as Elder died. The problem with the Cortex guy is that he's too tanky, and that I'm not able to sit close to him, unlike something like the Uber Zeri. But yeah, so I died a few times, whatever, okay. Once we finally get rid of the Cortex boss, which is like the really annoying part, we can easily clear out a Zeri, and then all that's remaining is Shaper and Chayula, but as you can see, Shaper is very easy to deal with, and then finally all that's left is going to be Chayula here. So once again, we walk up, we debuff, and then we completely annihilate him. And there it is, 5-link, no flask, Feared down. I mean, how many builds can do this, right? How many builds have this much potential when it comes to bossing builds on such a cheap budget? I can't really think of too many. But let's get into the actual build guide now. So there's going to be 2 POBs in the description of this video. One of them is going to be for the actual leveling, and the other is going to be for the endgame scenario. So in the leveling POB, as always, as I always do, there is going to be a notes section. In the notes section, there is going to be how to actually properly level this character. It's a very, very smooth leveling process. This does account for the changes to things like Smoke Mine and the different support gems. So this is updated on the actual leveling. And then at the bottom, if you don't know where to get certain gems, because you're a newer player or you just don't remember, at the bottom there's going to be a list of which vendor in which act will sell you which gem, and in some cases where it's a bit different, like for example Arc and Blashin, when we swap over to a miner build in Act 5, like so. Yeah, this is where to get the gems, and this is all the setup at different levels. Really important to do the one recipe as well, so that's why I put some asterisks there. So that should be all you need in terms of the leveling. Of course, as well as always, under my leveling trees, I have different trees. Now my face was hiding it, but you can easily see them right there. So the leveling trees, right, Brutus, Merveil, and all the progression all the way up to Blood Aqueducts. Blood Aqueducts is the last of the progression, and then after that you're going to be moving on to the endgame tree, because this POB you're going to be done with, and the endgame tree is going to be the second POB linked in the description. And that's going to be the actual build guide with the items and the proper gem setups for the endgame. Okay, first thing I want to talk about with this build is the defensive layers of this build. So this build does seem extremely squishy, right? I mean, 3000 life, what can you really expect? But the reality is that this build is actually not that squishy. So I want to talk about defensive layers real quick, because there's actually quite a few of them. Our first defensive layer is Blind. This is coming from Born of the Shadows, which is our first our first lab that we are going to be getting. This was in the other leveling tree. You can pay attention to the labs, but just for now, Born of the Shadows is your normal lab. This is your second lab, Bomb Specialist. Demolition Specialist, your third lab, which you should be doing just before getting to maps in Act 10. And then Uber Lab is going to be Explosive Expert because you don't need the damage prior to that. We are taking advantage of all 3 nodes when it comes to the Explosive Expert, by the way, which is why it's pretty insane for damage. Okay, so that's for your labs, and this is your first defensive layer, Born in the Shadows for the Blind. Our second defensive layer is going to be Dodge and Spell Dodge with Acrobatics and Phase Acrobatics. One thing that I want to talk about when really quickly when it comes to these two is that you actually have 2 choices when it comes to your, well, technically you could run both, but you can run both Vow Righteous Fire for damage or Vow Grace, or even both. I would recommend choosing between the 2. I actually tend to gravitate towards Vow Grace more so than Vow Righteous Fire, because it seems like my damage is so high that I just don't care about Vow Righteous Fire. And Vow Grace actually caps out my attack dodge, or just about 74%, and nearly caps out my spell dodge at 64%, from 40-60. Or sorry, from 40-30 to 74-64. So Vow Grace is huge, and I highly recommend highly considering it, right? It's pretty good as a defensive layer, especially when mapping. It's not so great for bossing, but for mapping or things like, for example, Uber at Ziri, right? All the different rooms have so many monsters, you could easily just have like permanent uptime or close to on Vow Grace, and that's a massive defensive layer. All right, next defensive layer is going to be Arrow Dancing. This is giving you 40% chance to evade projectile attacks. So this is super good for Adziri, especially. Uber Adziri, the spears that she throws are a projectile attack, and this is going to make it so almost 50% of the time she's just not going to hit you with them. So this is going to help you with that specific boss, but also all the other bosses and mapping in general. It's really, really nice. The 20% less chance to evade melee attacks is actually not that big of a deal, because we counterattack that with the fact that we are blinding everything. So yeah, and then our last defensive layer on the tree is Wind Dancer for 20% less damage taken if you haven't been hit recently. So this is not a super great node in general, but it does prevent one-shots, and that's basically the only thing we want from this. The goal of this entire node is to prevent getting one-shotted, because even if you get hit to like 1 HP, you can easily flask up to full in literally one click of a button, right? So I could go from 0 HP to full in one click of my flask, which is why Arrow Dancing is really, really good, because it prevents you from getting absolutely one-shotted. So we have 1 defensive layer, 2 defensive layer, 3 defensive layer, 4 defensive layers on the tree, and there's actually a bit more than that. So let's talk about those. And that is going to be Steel Skin. Now, one of the things that's going to be very, very important on this build is to get a lot of strength on your gear. I'll talk about that when we get to the item portion, because this allows us to get a really, really high level of Steel Skin. As you can see, my Steel Skin here is level 20, which gives me a shield of 2,200. So even if my life pool is only 3,000, with Steel Skin, it's another 2,200. Of course, we are res capped. Of course, we have all these other defensive layers. So, for example, if I pop in Vow Grace here, right? If I enable Vow Grace, I have all this. I'm res capped, nearly dodge and spell dodge capped. Got a little bit of block chance as well. It's not that squishy, right? Of course, it's not a tank, but it's not that squishy. And I think it's really important to mention. Okay, now let's look at the actual gem setup. So we're using Flame Dash, Arcane Surge, and Smoke Mine. Now, I personally dropped Second Wind because it's no longer anywhere near as useful as it was before. It used to give us like pretty massive amounts of where is it? Second Wind. I know I have some in here. There you go. I got a ton of them. It used to give us really, really, really good amounts of cooldown recovery rate, but now it's actually giving us reduced cooldown recovery rate. And personally, I'd rather have less uptime right, from the cooldown recovery rate than the +1 charge, right? Sorry, more uptime. My bad. Can't speak. So I'd rather not have 4 charges on my smoke mine and my flame dash. I'd much rather have the increased cooldown recovery speed. Now, this is personal preference. If you don't like using smoke mine, you could easily just use second wind instead, and then you would get no charge on smoke mine, but 4 charges on flame dash. It really kind of is up to you what you want to go with in terms of your 3rd gem here. You could even cut out both and use like something else if you wanted to instead. Like I was talking earlier about having 2 Val skills, you could easily put it in here instead. Now we are going to be using either Val Righteous Fire or Val Grace, or again, if you cut out Smoke Mine and Second Wind, you could actually use both. On your ring in the Malachi's Artifice, it's going to be very important that we use Orb of Storms, and that's something I'll talk about when I get to the items. Our skill gems is going to be Fireball, High Impact Mines, Inspiration, Combustion. This is our 4 link. Our 5th link is going to be Swift Assembly. So this is mandatory. And now the 6th link is where you basically get to choose what you want to go with. GMP for clear, trap and mine damage for single target. Typically you should be using a tablia anyways, so 6th link should be pretty much always there. But let's just say you get a 5 link early in the league or something like that. Personally, I would probably use GMP because I don't think you'll need the damage from trap and mine damage. Okay, so in terms of your auras, we were going with Skitterbots. Skitterbots it's insane how much damage this gives us. Look at that, 39% more damage. So yeah, Skitterbots is mandatory, and the reason why it's so good is because it enables explosive experts to work with burning, shocked, and chilled. So that's why we really, really like Skitterbots here. It's better than anything else by far. And Herald of Ash. Herald of Ash is decent damage. We could easily drop that if we have issues with mana, but I don't think we should have any issues with mana because of the way that I made this build. As you can see, it has a lot of unreserved mana here, 40% unreserved mana. That is coming mostly from these nodes here alongside our Anoint, which is Efficient Explosive. Talk about that in a minute. Okay, next we have the Low Life Swap. This is completely optional. It really depends if you want to do it or not, but it does give us ridiculous amounts of damage. Look at that. My damage is 1.469 million. I enabled that. I go to 1.7. You're like, okay, that's not too great. But this also gives us Pain Attunement, and there we go, 2.185. So it's not quite doubling your damage, but it's giving us like 50% more damage, which is absolutely insane considering our damage is already really good. This, I would say, is only mandatory or necessary or useful when it comes to the Feared. If you're not farming the Feared, anything below that, even Cyrus and all that, you should never, ever, ever use this setup. It also requires you to have Enlightenment, and I'm expecting Enlightenment to be pretty expensive in the upcoming league with the nerfs to mana, and also with the fact that no league mechanics are going to be dropping level 2 and higher Enlighten anymore. Only level 1 Enlightens, which means that leveling gems is actually probably going to be a good way to make currency this league, because I'm expecting Enlightenment Powers to be extremely expensive. Okay, next we have pretty much the focal point of this build outside of the Oberstorms in the Malachi's Artifice, and this is going to be our Arcanist brand setup, which, by the way, is why we need to use Oberstorms. A lot of people like to use Storm brand, but we can't because we are already using a brand. Okay, Arcanist brand is insane. First things first, what it does is that you put it on the ground, right? And then when you put it on the ground, it's going to activate these different skills that are linked to it, and then it's going to do that until it disappears. So what do we use in there? Sniper's Mark, by far the best curse for this build. First off, because cursed enemies take 35% increased damage from projectile hits. That's literally 30% more damage, as you can see. That's insane, okay? Second off, because it actually helps with flash charge generation. If you look at Sniper's Mark, it gives you gain a life flash charge and gain a mana flash charge when you hit a cursed enemy, no more than once every 0.5 seconds. So that means that you're getting 2 charges per second. That's huge. For sustaining, that is absolutely massive when you are boss killing, right? Because it means that if you're using your Arcanist brand properly with Sniper's Mark, you're going to have incredibly good uptime on both your life flask and your mana flask. Massive. Next, we use Flame Wall. Now, this is a really, really good damage buff because obviously projectiles are going through the Flame Wall and then they're getting increased damage. That's pretty much all that it does. Okay, one thing that you might be wondering, and you might be like, why are you using this, is Frost Bomb. Okay, Frost Bomb, and the reason I'm using Frost Bomb is very simple. it is for the 75% reduced life recovery regeneration rate. This essentially this gem here, Frost Bomb, is an anti-Maven gem. That's pretty much its entire focus. That's pretty much the only reason I use it. Because Maven has the thing where she does a vitality boon, right? Where she heals the bosses by a ridiculous amount. This is going to prevent that life regen from making it so I have to kill the bosses twice, really. Now, it does give cold exposure, which we do not care about whatsoever, but that's okay. It really is for the life regeneration, and I think that it is the best option that we have in this case. You could also go with Wave of Conviction, but you'll see why I don't do that in a minute. Okay, next we have Steel Skin on left click personally. You could also do it manually if you wanted to. You could also use it on cast when damage taken, but the problem is that we have so little life that our cast when damage taken would have to be extremely low level, and at that point maybe Immortal Call would be better. That's why I have it on left click for, it's 50% uptime actually, because I use it with increased duration, so I get 3 seconds of uptime on it, and I have a 3-second cooldown. So 50% of the time, I'm nearly double as tanky, which is nice. Okay, and finally, Cast on Death Portal. No League Starter build of mine would ever be complete without Cast on Death Portal, for the very simple reason that I don't mind dying in maps, but what I do mind is having to rerun the map if I die. This prevents me from ever having to backtrack, ever having to rerun a map. If I die, that's okay. I just hop back in the map, and it's like nothing ever happened. That being said, deaths don't seem to be too big of an issue when mapping with this build. It actually is surprisingly tanky, I'm not kidding. Okay, next and finally, let's talk about the actual items for this build. So the wands are basically very simple. Either you get +1 fire or +1 all spell skill gems. This is going to give you a ton of damage for, of course, a spell like Fireball. And next, what's going to be very important is that you get critical strike chance to spells. Because of the nerf to Diamond Flask, a massive nerf, right? Losing critical strike is lucky. As you can see, we have nearly 700% critical strike multiplier on this build, but only below 70% crit chance. It's really hard to cap out your crit. In the current meta, it's going to be very, very difficult because of the nerf to Diamond Flask and the nerf to Bottled Faith. I think that, for example, the Watcher's Eyes for Hatred base crit is going to be incredibly expensive this league, actually. So yeah, spell crit on your wands is very, very good. Fortunately for us, there's actually a wand craft for spell crit. Critical strike chance to spells, as you can see on a one-hander, it goes up to 69%, so you could easily just craft it yourself, right? You don't have you don't need like T1 or anything like that. 69% alone is going to drastically increase your critical strike chance. As you can see, these wands are giving me about 5% crit each, so that's 10% crit on my wands, and then they're only like, this is 87%, this is 73%, so barely above what you can craft. So yeah, very, very strong. Otherwise, you're looking for crit multi and you're looking for spell damage. So 3 stats, in my opinion, is going to be good enough. So you can life search something with either +1 fire or +1 all, and then do a count 1 of either spell damage or crit chance to spells with an open prefix or an open suffix, and then you just craft whatever's missing. You craft the spell damage if it's missing, you craft the crit chance to spells if it's missing. These 3 mods are all you care about. And of course, you know, afterwards it really is crit multi, which we want, and some flat damage is also good. That being said, I'll talk about flat damage in a second when it comes to the Malachi's Artifice. It's very, very, very important that we have 0 flat fire damage to spells on this build, because otherwise you're completely cucking yourself. Okay, Eye of Malice is going to be the helmet of choice. First off, because it gives us free exposure, right? Exposure on hit is really, really nice. And the second reason is because of the last line here. Nearby enemies have 50% increased fire and cold resistance. Now, this might sound really bad. You would think that this is basically adding 50% res, but it's not an additional. It's actually a multiplier of 50%. So what that means is if a boss has 50% fire res and you sit next to it with Eye of Malice, now the boss has 75% fire res. Now, this is awful, right? But it also works the other way around. If a boss has -50 fire res and then you're you know, increasing that to -75 with this Eye of Malice, you're getting a ton of value. It's almost an additional support gem from this Eye of Malice. It's actually pretty crazy. So the way that this is going to work is that we are going to need to get the monster's resistances to as low as possible. I've already spoken about the links, and this is why we use combustion. This is going to make it so ignited enemies have minus 19 fire resistance, and I think the highest resistance in the entire game is 66 on bosses, so this is bringing that down. Most bosses have 50, so this is bringing it down to like 30, and then we're going to bring it down further, a lot further, with Malachi's Artifice, which is going to give us elemental equilibrium. This is why we need 0 flat fire, which is also why we don't run something like Anchor on this build. This is going to further decrease it by minus 50, so just combustion alongside elemental equilibrium, basically any boss in the game is at 0 resistance or in the negative resistances, which is where Eye of Malice starts to gain value, a lot of value. Okay, next in terms of chest piece, we are going with Tabula Rasa. This is just a cheap option. Plus 2 AoE gems is probably something like an X in the League Start scenario, or even 50C if you're lucky enough. But you don't need that. This is only required for much later content. When it comes to early mapping and early progression of your Atlas, just a regular Tabula, even a regular 5-link is more than enough damage. In terms of gloves, life and resistance, nothing special. If you want to push it a little bit more, you can get Calling Strike. Calling Strike is actually really nice for bossing, but you really don't need it. What I would recommend if you do want it, however, is to alt spam for Calling Strike and then augment Regal and then just craft on life as the last prefix, or like resistance if you already have life or whatever. But just Calling Strike and life, you can easily get the resistance elsewhere. And then this is basically going to give you free culling. In terms of endgame, basically unnerved on your gloves would give you an additional 10% damage, so unnerved culling and then crafted life. But that's more endgame. All right, boots, life and res, and it's going to be very important that we get strength on the boots. This is where we're going to get a lot of our strength. We don't need to get a whole lot of dex on our gear because we are pathing downside. We were getting a tremendous amount of dex on the tree already from the pathing itself. But strength is going to be a problem, and we need a lot of strength for that steel skin that I was talking about. So fortunately for us, strength on boots is typically extremely cheap, a lot cheaper than something like resistance. People don't really care about strength. They don't value it much. All right, a Citrine Amulet is going to be the way to go for sure. Citrine gives us both strength and dex. Now, we don't need 180 strength, and we don't need 180 dex at all. The strength that we need, I think the highest is something like 155 for steel skin, and it's the exact same 155 dexterity as well for the sniper's mark. So yeah, no, it's not like 180, 155 on each is good enough. So this Citrine base here of strength and dex is going to help us reach that a lot easier. Otherwise, you're looking for crit chance and multi. Now, I typically go for multi. But in this case, especially with the nerf to Diamond Flask, it's actually not a bad idea to consider going for crit chance instead on the amulet. All right, Malachi's Artifice is an extremely good ring. I already spoke about why. It also gives you a ton of resistance, 83% resistance for the lightning res. In this case, you could get all the way up to 100. But if you're going to be using a Wise Oak, you do need to make sure that your highest resistance is fire. Okay, another thing that I mentioned that I put on this ring here is 100% increased critical strike chance, and this is from the nerfed Diamond Flask. We are still going to be using a Diamond Flask. I still think that it's the better option because honestly, we are a crit build, and without crit, we don't do a lot of damage. And 100% increased critical strike chance for us is about 6% crit, so it's not crazy. It's nothing like a Diamond Flask used to be, giving us like 25% crits, but it's better than nothing. And I'd much rather have 66% crit chance than 60% crit chance when I'm relying on 700% crit multi. Okay. Our rings, or other rings, sorry, is just life and resistance, and the belt is life and resistance. In terms of our flask, we are going with the Panicked Flask. This is really good for the low life toggle I was talking about. Enduring Eternal Flask of Warding, this hasn't changed. We're still obviously going to be lacking a lot of mana. We still need an Enduring Flask. Warding is still going to be the best when it comes to flasks that we spam a lot, which is, I mean, our mana flask is what we're going to be using the most. Quicksilver for move speed, and we are going to swap that out for an Adziri's Promise for damage. Obviously, Adziri is getting nerfed pretty significantly. Wise Oak also getting nerfed pretty significantly, but still going to be the way to go. Both for the defensive properties, right? The all-res is nice if you get a map, for example, with elemental weakness or something. But the pen is also quite good. And if you're able to make your resistances all the exact same, it is also quite good for defense purposes. Now, this is why the last flask slot is empty. It's because it's a diamond flask, but it's getting nerfed. So I put it on the Malachi's. For the suffix, you can use whatever you want. Now, one last thing that I want to talk about is going to be jewels. So the clusters, there's one node that you care about, and it's Expert Sabotage for the 10% chance to double detonate. This does stack, and it does work with efficient explosives, so we're getting that twice. That's the only node that you care about. The second node can be anything you want. I'm personally going with the Surprise Sabotage, but if that's, you know, harder to roll, you can literally use anything else and it's going to work. Surprise Sabotage is just decent for the pen, which works quite well with our Eye of Malice, and of course the multi, but you could use literally anything else. In terms of regular jewels, it's just double multi. You can use multi while dual wielding because we have 2 wands. You can use multi with fire. You can use global multi. You can use multi for spells, and you can use multi for elemental skills. So you've got 6 different multis, I believe, or 5 different multis that you can use. Any 2 of them and you're good to go. If you want a more defensive option, you can go for life in a single multi. Those are going to be a little bit more expensive though, typically 10-15 C per jewel or something. Meanwhile, double multis like 5 C each. They're very, very cheap. Another option, if you want to go for cheaper but a little bit less damage, is go life, and instead of going multi, you can go life and mine throwing speed. Typically people don't really value mine throwing speed at all, so you can get those for extremely cheap. And they're not quite comparable to something like double multi in terms of damage, but they are really nice for the feels goodness of the build, because obviously mine throwing speed, it feels really good. And the second reason is, of course, because you can get life on it, which is really nice for your defenses. But yeah, that's pretty much it for my build guide for the upcoming 3.15 league. Hopefully you guys enjoy and have a really successful league if you do plan to play this build. I do think there's other options available. Minions, traps are looking really solid for bossing. But the reason I'm going for that is because it's got incredible map clear speed, in my opinion. Very good map clear speed. And just because of the budget, man. It's just so cheap. It's just so incredibly cheap, and the main reason for me is because I'm going to be going from that to an assassin build, probably a brand build for speed boss killing, right, and for carries as well. But by using a shadow, I can easily make the transition to something like a brand build. So that's why I'm personally choosing this build. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed the build guide. Before I go, I want to say a massive thank you to my supporters: Jordan, Fruitfly, Thomas, Naroth, Master, Tim, Nate, Jacoff, Flame Scorpion, Reese, ML, Road to Millions, Alex, Brandon, Don, Joseph, welcome back, Peta, Edicus, Scott, Bard, Grimoire, Johnny, Ronald, Kevin, Mercury, and Bizen, as well as, of course, everybody else who supported me in the past and anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.